So I'm like Donovan Hinish joining Notre Dame's 2022 class on Friday, I believe it was. One that we talked about before is, yeah, we kind of think that he's going to end up in the class. Matter of when, not if he decides to commit. Well, he committed. Why now? And what's Notre Dame getting?
Why now is I always felt it was just a matter of the ball being in Notre Dame's court. That's my opinion. I think Donovan wanted in the class since he was like 13. Like this is just where he wanted to be. Pittsburgh and Virginia Tech made a run at the 6'2", 270-pounder from Pittsburgh Central Catholic. But yeah, this one was just Notre Dame. He had flirted with taking an official visit to Pittsburgh at the end of June, but I just kind of giggled at that. I was like, this kid, he's just going to Notre Dame. So, the timing it was just time. Two parties got together and it was like, all right, let's do this thing. So he announced June 4th. In terms of what Notre Dame's getting, I think a workhorse. Just kind of all of those cliches. Insert here, a coach's dream. The first one in, last one out. Like that's him. I know Notre Dame fans just want a bunch of, 5-star uber talented players, but you know I think Notre Dame is going to continue to be a program that, yes, you do need those players, but the Donovan Hinishes and the Kurt Hinishes and, the Chris Finks, the Ian Books, like some of those guys that don't have the greatest God-given talent in the world are still important to the Notre Dame football program. And I know, some Notre Dame fans might be mad at me for saying that, but, I just think that someone like Donovan Hinish, who is going to stick it out, if he's not starting by year 3, he's not going to transfer. He bleeds blue and gold. He is going to give his everything to that community. He's going to be incredible in the locker room. He's going to be well liked. And then on the football field, yeah, Donovan Hinish is, he's listed at 6'2", 270. Is he probably 6'1"? Is he a hair under 6'1"? I don't know. Kurt Hinish was listed at 6'3", and he's currently he was listed at 6'3" when he was a recruit. Now Notre Dame lists him at 6'1" and 3/4. Has Kurt Hinish shrunk an inch and a quarter in 4 years, however long it's been for him? No. So that's just how it goes. But I would say Donovan might be 6'1" and a half. That would 6'1" in that range. Doesn't have the longest arms, but he's super physical, extremely tough, strong. He's just a really solid player. But of course, you don't want a class full of Donovan Hinishes. So there's another defensive lineman that we will talk about later in the show that will be visiting Notre Dame. That's uber important.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, we when Kurt spoke to us in April during spring practice, he was asked about Donovan, and interestingly enough, here's what he had to say. I'll read the quote here. It starts: "He's a better all-around athlete than me. I kind of got the short end of the stick. It is what it is. The youngest gets it all. He's going to be a great player in the future." End quote. So yes, that's what the older brother scouting report says, and everything that you just said, yeah, I agree. And although I think it's worth saying that I imagine a lot of that was the discussion, narrative, what have you, when Kurt committed, and I think he outplayed a lot of that to now where he's a 3-year starter. All I'm going to say is I won't rule out Donovan from doing a similar thing.
Yeah.
Obviously, the depth charts and differences there and whatnot notwithstanding, but I think it's definitely possible.
That's such a criminally bad take that the police are coming after you, Patrick. I mean, that Donovan Hinish is going to be like Kurt Hinish? Come on. No, I'm kidding, obviously. I mean, Kurt's played in 50 games at Notre Dame, right? And then if he stays healthy this year, could play in, another potentially 14? I mean, over
Yeah, up
60
to 64.
games? I mean, of course, he took the extra year of COVID eligibility. Kurt Hinish is not redshirted. He's played 4 years. And, he might, he gets a 5th year to play and over 60 games. It's crazy. So you lose a Hinish, you gain a Hinish.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the extra year only allows Kurt to play this one more season, he won't overlap with Donovan.
That
But
would be
yeah,
amazing.
even without the free COVID year that Kurt elected to use, still 50 games in 4 years. I think just about anybody would sign up for that for well, a lot of players. But all right, let's move on. Why don't we go into Irish Invasion? That was, of course, this past weekend. Notre Dame didn't hold its Irish Invasion camp last year due to the pandemic. Hosted it on Sunday, offered 10 kids who were there. Mike, I think you want to touch on four of them, or at least four notable campers, three of whom received offers after their camp performances. I'm going to give the floor to you. We weren't able to be at Irish Invasion, still closed this year due to media for, I assume, pandemic related reasons. But what are you hearing coming off of that, and who some of these new guys on the board to know are?
Certainly a ton of articles at blueandgold.com. I would just highly recommend going and checking the site out. Had stories on the seven initial guys. Excuse me, I should say a story on the seven initial offers Sunday night, and then Notre Dame offered three more underclassmen DBs, two on Monday and then one on Tuesday. Spoke to all three of those guys, had a story on. Just tons of recruiting coverage, transfer portal coverage, all that stuff. Blueandgold.com, certainly the place to be. But like I talked about earlier, there's so many guys to talk about, but we're just not going to do an extremely long show today. So there were four that I felt like it would just be nuts if I didn't talk about. Brennan Vernon did not need to camp at Notre Dame. He's the number 9 player in the country. Notre Dame's very first offer in the 2023 class, coming back in January of 2020. He didn't have to. Notre Dame knows he's a stud, but he wanted to visit Notre Dame June 6th, worked out, and he was like, why not camp? I mean, it's an opportunity for him as well to, learn from Coach Elston, improve his game, and then see what Coach Elston is like. So I'm told that Vernon was incredible, Patrick. One source, I'm not going to say the name of the player, one, because it's escaping me, and two, you just don't need to throw out the comparison. I mean, it was like a first round top 5 guy. Like Notre Dame felt that he was incredible, and the comparisons are just through the roof for Brendan Vernon. So absolute stud. On the visit side of things, it went very well for Brendan Vernon. A lot of people think he's an Ohio State lean, right? I mean, you see the future cast here for YouTube audience. You already got 3 in for Ohio State. One, it just appears, was yesterday from the Godfather, Mike Farrell. I don't think it's Ohio State. I think it might be Notre Dame. I think Ohio State's probably, the betting favorite at this point, but there always seems to be one kid a cycle, if not, 2 or 3, that's just like you think he's going elsewhere, and then he just falls in love with Notre Dame. Think about someone like Deion Colsey, Georgia's backyard, and he goes to Notre Dame. Lorenzo Styles, his dad went to Ohio State, and he's in Ohio State's backyard. He goes to Notre Dame. Like, this is all sorts of guys like that. Brendan Vernon might be that in the 2023 class. We will just have to see. Next guy I want to talk about, his first name is pronounced Alec. I'm going to just say his last name is Aomaner. I don't know. But he's a little bit of a late bloomer. This is a class of 2022 wide receiver, so he's a rising senior. He's got over 20 offers. He's a 6'3", 205-pound receiver from Canada who is now in Massachusetts. Now, does that get Notre Dame fans excited that it could be Chase Claypool 2.0? So he left Notre Dame for a official visit to Vanderbilt the next day. He's also supposed to be taking an official visit to Tennessee. Notre Dame loved what they saw from Alec. He's near the top of the receiver board now. If he called to commit tomorrow, would they take him? Nah, I have got no idea. I actually think so, especially with a transfer that we'll talk about that happened on Wednesday. Is it more definitive that they're going to take 4 guys? They saw Alec in person and they loved him again, like I said. So C.J. Williams, Tobias Merriweather, Nicholas Anderson, Amorion Walker, the other big receiver targets, I don't think they've seen any of them in person run routes. They have seen Alec, though, and they loved it. So certainly a big one there. So we'll move on here to pair of recruits that I wrote a story about on Wednesday. One of my favorite stories, it took me a few hours to put together, but one of the favorite stories I've written in a while. Notre Dame offering Jaden Osbury, a class of 2023, listed as an athlete by Rivals, definitely a linebacker at the next level. He went to camp at Notre Dame this weekend, the number 24 overall player. I think Notre Dame would have offered this kid anyways, but he wanted to go prove to the staff that he was worthy of an offer. And then Austin Osbury is his brother, a four-star recruit in the 2022 class, ranked at the number 202 overall player in the country, number 26 cornerback. He worked out a little bit at corner, but he's probably a safety at the next level. We just talked about Kurt Hinish and Donovan Hinish for a little while there. How about more brothers? I mean, Notre Dame has the Adamilola brothers. You have the Okwara brothers. I mean, Hinish brothers. Maybe the Osbury brothers to Notre Dame. Maybe is there any other super notable brother tandems that I'm forgetting about in the recent history here? Or is that the
Off
groups?
the top of my head, ooh, this is testing my very average recall skills. No, I mean in baseball, the Contreras brothers hit homers in the same night for the first time in their career. Wilson Contreras, Cubs
There you go.
catcher. I'll turn this into a Cubs podcast anytime, but the people don't want to hear that. They want to talk
What
about
about
recruiting.
Bertrand? I don't follow Notre
Yes,
Dame baseball much, but there's
yes. There's the I don't know. Is that the him and those two in the Heinishes, most notable Notre Dame football brother pairings? Although of course John Michael Bertrand, Notre Dame's best pitcher. Baseball is starting up its 3-game or best of 3 super regional with John Michael going on the hill on Saturday for that first game. Yeah, I would say maybe we're looking at. I'm sure Notre Dame would love to add the Osburys into
yeah.
that
Oh yeah.
conversation. But yes,
Yeah. So they had a great visit at Notre Dame. So here's the cool thing. I wanted to interview Jaden and Austin together, either on the phone together or do a YouTube thing and put it on podcast as well. I wasn't able to get them together. Austin ended up going out of this country or something. So I wasn't able to talk to them at the same time. But since I had them separate, it was even better because if I asked Austin something and he said, I liked this, and then I asked the same question to Jade and he said, yeah, same. But I interviewed them separate and they had the same answers on everything. Here are the two most notable things: that they felt that Notre Dame had the best indoor facility they've ever seen, and their dad has worked at LSU for the past 20 years. His name's Verge. Awesome name, by the way. I'm not 100% sure if that's how you pronounce it, but it's an amazing name. They've had to have seen a ton of schools, especially in the SEC, but they feel like Notre Dame best indoor facility, that was cool. And then when I asked them about, look, you're a big time prospect. Why did you need to go camp at Notre Dame? Or why would you want to, I should say? And they said, it's Notre Dame. Both of them, same exact answer. Why not? It's Notre Dame. So when you start hearing that, and I've been covering Notre Dame recruiting for a couple years now, there's a little bit of, all right, you sense Notre Dame type kid. Sources felt that. In the Notre Dame side of things, they felt that those two kids fit Notre Dame really well. So Notre Dame's set up really well on its 2022 defensive backboard. But Austin Osbury, if Notre Dame doesn't get, a Jake Pope and or Xavier Nwankpa, Jaden Bellamy's also a safety target for Notre Dame. Osbury could be a really good player for Notre Dame. I mean, just think about where Notre Dame defensive back recruiting has been in past years. And now you're talking about the number 202 player in the country kind of being like a fringe take, like really? So that, it's certainly looking good for Notre Dame.
yeah, it's I don't want to say that you know the Osbury brothers wouldn't have done what they did and come up here without an offer and prove themselves of an offer, or at least in Jaden's case, without Marcus Freeman being here. But it just kind of feels like one of those things that doesn't hurt at all. I mean, like you said, it seems like these are two very smart young men who just like the school and the program in and of itself, no matter who's on the staff that would have wanted to come do this. But I suspect that kind or that Freeman has again only helps that. And if I remember correctly, Mike, you said that he's been in touch with the family and spoken with at least one of them, right?
Yeah, you're talking about. Sorry, Caleb Evans just tweeted out new Instagram posts. It's nothing. It's just him reporting his Georgia offer. I think.
Hey, don't worry. I saw the same notification when you were talking, and I thought like, oh man, we're gonna have to pause this podcast for emergency breaking news, aren't we? No, just tweeting an Instagram link
So,
to
what was your question then?
post an offer. Anyway, yeah, you did confirm it actually, and I'm impressed with multitasking. Yes, Marcus Freeman has been in touch and involved in the recruitment of the Osprey brothers.
Yeah, no, yeah, certainly they've been in touch for a while. Yeah, I think it was just, hey, we're interested in you, come on up, and they did. So yeah, certainly looks good for both of those guys. I mean, they both have LSU offers. Their dad works there. You would think they would be LSU locks, but hey, some of these kids want to blaze their own trails.
Well, we'll see. And that seems like about the best case scenario for Notre Dame, that they're interested enough to come up on their own dime and prove themselves to the staff. But all right, one more item we should touch on here before we go on to official visitors this weekend. Notre Dame did have a transfer out of the program Wednesday. Sophomore wide receiver Jay Brunelle entering the transfer portal after a freshman season in which he did not appear in the game, was banged up, enrolled early, would have missed the spring session in 2020 with his shoulder injury had it not been canceled due to the pandemic, of course. Played this spring, a little banged up. Most notable thing here really is that it leaves one player now in or from the 2019 and 20 receiver classes, which you look at as might be a little bit of a problem in 2022, 2023, which and really, all right, you want to see some good freshman year mileage and development, even if they don't play a lot from that 2021 trio of Lorenzo Styles, Jaden Thomas, Deion Colsey. And then, as it relates to 2022 recruiting, perhaps that opens up a spot here for another ad, which you would certainly think is the case. Without Brunelle in the room now, Notre Dame has 9 wide receivers on scholarship for 2021. 4 of those guys, Braden Lindsey, Kevin Austin, Lawrence Keys, Joe Wilkins, are academic seniors. Another one of them, Avery Davis, a graduate senior. So you look at that group and think, yeah, you would imagine there's some guys who don't come back for that 5th year. Or Avery Davis doesn't come back for that 6th year if he builds on his good 2020 season. So all of a sudden, I think this position to tie it back into recruiting becomes even more important in terms of the number you take in 2022 and the ability to get some difference makers who can, you think, all right, we're not going to press anybody in here, but someone who you look at right now and think, yeah, I think there's a better chance that he can come in and push for playing time or get on the field in some capacity just because you're going to need it. And if for those curious, it's initially 5 receivers from 2019 and 2020. A quick rundown of who's gone: Jordan Johnson, former 5-star transfer; Jay Brunelle, transfer; 2019, Kendall Abdur-Rahman, kind of bounced around between wide receiver, running back. He transferred earlier this spring. And Cam Hart, now playing corner, potential starter at boundary corner for Notre Dame this year. That leaves Xavier Watts, a slot guy, as a lone receiver, I should say, from the 2019 and 2020 classes. So, yeah, a little bit of a void there.
Yeah, to say the least. 2 thoughts for me. One is, I mean, look, how many transfers does Notre Dame have? Just had this calendar year, what, like 13 now? 12, something like that, Patrick?
Since the end of 2020, 12 in the portal, 11 who would have left, assuming that's what Brunelle, in fact, does.
Yeah, okay.
Houston Griffith, of course, entered and came back. Yeah.
So, a high majority of those guys, it just go to find their better place, right? Like, or like a Dylan Gibbons, just wasn't starting. Like, go to Florida State, like, good for you. Most of these are pat on the backs. Jordan Johnson, just that wasn't working out. He, from what I heard, it wasn't a click. Like, they're just, it just from football to maybe personality wise, academically, just wasn't working out. This one, though, hurts. Like, Brunelle, his talents he couldn't show them. He was dinged up so much. Um, so maybe he would have not have been a great player at Notre Dame. Maybe he would have been, but he was constantly dinged up. This spring he was injured and then came back for the last few practices and was he basically forced himself back on the field. He probably shouldn't have been playing. That's how injured he was. I can't remember exactly what the injury was. If it was upper or lower body, but he basically was like, I need to be out there. In the locker room, he was great. Really good student. Like Jay Brunelle was a great Notre Dame fit. And you definitely don't like seeing undergrad transfers, right? I mean, like in the Dylan Gibbons case, he had got his degree. He goes on like great. But the underclassmen ones sting a little bit more, especially got Jay Brunelle, who, I do feel like had a bright future. And which leads into my second point of everyone wants to crucify Del Alexander right now, right? Obviously not literally, but like Del Alexander is the fall guy for this. But when you look at each of them individually, like those five guys in the 2019 and 2020, or I should say four, because Xavier Watts is obviously at Notre Dame. Like Kendall Abdul-Rahman, like he just was a bust, right? I mean, like he just wasn't working out at Notre Dame. Cam Hart was when he was a recruit, everyone thought he was a DB anyways. So he clearly didn't work out at receiver. He moved to DB. Jordan Johnson, goodness gracious, I don't know if you blame Dell on this. And Jay Brunelle, in talking to sources, this was not on the Notre Dame coaches. Like Jay just struggled with injuries. And I think the physical struggles that he had bled into mentally, like confidence. I think he just struggled and needed a fresh start. So when you look at each of them individually, I don't know, if Del Alexander is to blame. But to be fair, when you step back and just look down at it, you've got to blame Dell for something, right? I mean, like this is his group. This is Notre Dame. This is a championship level team, right? Competing for the playoff spot, every year it seems, and making it to the past 3 years. Like it's inexcusable. But again, when you look at it at an individual level, then I understand a little bit more. So I'm kind of in the middle on the blame game here. I think it's part just bad luck, for the lack of a better term, but also, you've Del Alexander has to get some blame, in the rest of that staff.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of a mix of a number of things. When it comes to Alexander in particular, he's got a big year ahead of him in the sense of needs to get something out of a pretty heavily turned over receiver room and a lot of seniors they're really counting on. And now, especially as you've seen a couple of guys leave the program, needs to land a impactful 2022 class and hit on a lot of these guys at they're the top of their board just for numbers, uh, perspectives, and making sure that position doesn't completely fall off the face of the earth. But in terms of Brunelle in particular, it's a bummer that he was bogged down by injuries and just couldn't quite ever get himself healthy, at least in these first 3 semesters he's been on campus. Would have been hard to see a path to playing time for him this year, just given all those seniors at that position that Notre Dame is really pushing and banking on giving them a lot of mileage. And then, we'll see what Lorenzo Styles is able to do as if he's a bit player on offense and a punt returner. But even if you put Brunelle back in the room, he's still only one of 2 players from that 2019 and 2020 class. That's still not that high a number, and theoretically would have given him a somewhat of a clearer path in 2022. But either way, you just hope he's able to get past those injury bugaboos and get healthy wherever he ends up.
You talked about Del Alexander. He was a guy who came with Chip Long. This will be his 4th or 5th year at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Like the shelf life for assistant coaches is typically, 3 years, 4 years. Especially at like the coordinator spot. You're either, and of course, Del Alexander's not a coordinator, but like for coordinators, after 3 years, you're either not good enough and you're getting canned, or you're so good that you're going to go get a head coach job somewhere. Now, guys like Reese, Elston, and Pullian might be the exceptions to that, but Dell, it's like, what's next? Like, if this doesn't get better, does Notre Dame look to move on after this season? I think that's certainly a storyline for this season, and one that Notre Dame fans are already talking about a lot.